I remember that night at our cabin in New Hampshire vividly. It's been etched into my memory like an indelible mark. It was around midnight, and my ex and I were lying in bed, engaged in casual conversation about the day's events. Our cabin, our summer haven, nestled by a small lake surrounded by other houses, felt like a sanctuary. The only signs of civilization were the scattered lake houses, and beyond them, the expansive woods stretched for miles, untamed and wild. The atmosphere that night was calm, the lake reflecting the moon's soft glow. Pine needles covered the ground around our cabin, providing a natural carpet that crunched underfoot. The air held the familiar scent of pine, a fragrance that signified our retreat from the hustle of everyday life. Little did we know, the tranquility of that night was about to be shattered. Suddenly, breaking through our peaceful conversation, we heard footsteps outside our open window. The window was strategically positioned, opening right at the bottom of our bed, where our feet lay. The footsteps were hushed, as if whatever was making them was attempting to move without being detected. It was odd because the ground around the cabin, littered with pine needles, usually betrayed any attempt at silent movement. We exchanged glances, trying to dismiss the unease building within us. It's probably just some animal, we reassured ourselves. Minutes passed, and the footsteps returned, this time closer. The stealthy, deliberate movements were now right outside the window. That's when the unsettling reality hit us: someone or something was attempting to approach our cabin quietly. Anxiety gripped us as we strained to hear any indication of the intruder's intentions. And then, to our horror, we saw it, a hand slowly emerging through the open window. Panic set in, and we screamed, jolting the entire cabin awake. My parents, in the adjacent room, rushed to us, bewildered by our distress. We recounted the events, the fear still fresh in our voices. My father, in an attempt to soothe our nerves, rationalized the incident as a figment of our imaginations. But how could it be? Both my ex and I had witnessed the same eerie sequence of events. It was more than just a trick of the mind, it was a shared experience etched into our memories. Despite my father's attempt to downplay the incident, a lingering unease settled within me. That room, once a haven, now held a sense of vulnerability. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had violated the sanctity of our space. Since that night, I've always felt a twinge of discomfort staying in that room, a constant reminder of that inexplicable intrusion. As the years passed, I couldn't shake the questions that lingered. Who or what had tried to enter our cabin that night, and why? The mystery haunted me, and each return to the cabin brought a mix of nostalgia and trepidation. I took to ensuring the windows were securely shut every night before bed, a ritual born out of necessity and paranoia. The incident spurred a newfound awareness of security. During subsequent visits, I found myself scrutinizing the surroundings, scanning the silent woods for any signs of movement. The cabin, once a carefree retreat, now carried the weight of that unsettling night. It prompted discussions with my family about enhancing security measures, motion-activated lights, perhaps even cameras. It wasn't just about the physical safety of our haven, it was about reclaiming a sense of peace that had been disrupted. Theories about that night swirled in my mind. Was it a person with ill intentions, trying to breach our sanctuary? Or could it have been a curious animal, exhibiting unusual behavior? The questions lingered, unresolved, like an open chapter waiting for closure. In the years since, I've come to realize that some mysteries defy neat explanations. Life, much like that night, is filled with the unexpected. The cabin, once a simple refuge, became a symbol of the complexities woven into our experiences. And though the unease persists, it serves as a reminder that even in the places we hold dearest, the unknown can intrude, leaving an indelible mark on our sense of security and the stories we carry with us. I was just 11 years old when this unsettling incident occurred, with my older sister Ariel at 14 and my younger sister Belle at 8. Our family situation was a mix of celebration and financial strain. My dad, a freelance programmer, had just wrapped up a lucrative project, but the weight of a staggering $500,000 plus debt loomed over us. My mom, not particularly skilled at budgeting, struggled to make ends meet. Our vacations were rare, usually confined to visits with relatives. That night, however, was different. We were in the midst of watching the movie, Final Destination, to mark the completion of my dad's latest project when the phone rang. Dad answered and disappeared with Mom, leaving us in suspense. In their absence, Belle took advantage of the situation, pausing the film and capturing Duchess, our dog. The news they returned with was unexpected. We were heading to a cabin for the weekend. The client for whom my dad had toiled owned a picturesque cabin by a lake in the mountains, and we were offered a weekend stay at a reduced price. It was Thursday, and my mom went into a packing frenzy. The cabin was a 2.5-hour drive away, so by the time we arrived, it was late. Upon unloading, we explored the cabin, a quaint ranch-style dwelling with a peculiar nook at head height. Meant for storage, this 3-foot-tall space became our haven, housing numerous board games. As we settled into our designated rooms, I couldn't help but notice a locked closet opposite the queen-sized bed Belle and I were to share. Its contents remained a mystery. That night, after the day's adventures, we retired to bed. Belle, a notorious kicker, prompted a rearrangement of sleeping positions to prevent her from knocking over the lamp. I remember lying down and swiftly succumbing to sleep. However, I was abruptly awakened by Belle gripping my arm, frantically trying to burrow beneath me. In her frightened state, she squeaked incomprehensible words. As I sat up, my drowsy mind struggled to make sense of what was happening. Eventually, I saw something pale and human-shaped moving away from the window. Reacting instinctively, I pulled Belle out of bed, and we sought refuge with our parents. They dismissed our claims, attributing the sighting to our imagination. Mom instructed us to return to bed, reassuring us that if anything else occurred, we should inform them. Agreeing reluctantly, I returned to our room with Belle, switching positions to calm her nerves. I told her a story until she fell asleep, and soon after, I too succumbed to slumber. The following day, we explored the surroundings before spending the day in town, indulging in its small shops and local eateries. Laughter filled the air as we returned to the cabin, Ariel cracking jokes. However, the jovial atmosphere abruptly shifted when Dad, on the porch, signaled for everyone to stop. He delicately pushed the door open with a single finger, revealing that it wasn't latched. Bewilderment crossed our faces, and Dad motioned for silence. He entered the cabin, and we anxiously waited on the porch. Upon his return, a frown etched across his face. Dad locked the door, signaling something was amiss. Mom and Dad engaged in a private conversation, while Ariel, catching on, diverted Belle and me with the suggestion of a board game. Oblivious to the unfolding mystery, we played for hours until Dad declared it was bedtime at 9 o'clock, much to Ariel's displeasure. Belle and I returned to our room, Dad rushing in later, urgency in his movements. He scooped up Belle, grabbed my hand, and pulled us into the hallway. The high-pitched whine in the living room became evident, and Duchess, our dog, appeared anxious by the back door. Dad didn't release Belle and maintained his grip on my hand as we rushed out of the cabin and into the van. He retrieved Duchess and sped away from the cabin, the night's events shrouded in silence during the journey home. It took half an hour for Duchess to calm down. The next day, Dad recounted the events to Ariel, but Belle and I remained in the dark for years. It was a chilling revelation. Dad had been awoken by moaning outside his window. Investigating, he found the front door unlocked, items in the kitchen displaced, and Duchess growling at the ajar back door. The footprints discovered outside bells and my window added a sinister layer to the mysterious occurrence. The cabin, once a refuge, now harbored secrets and lingering questions that would persist in our memories for years to come. It was late November in Colorado, and I was around 7 or 8 years old. My father had this idea of taking us for a weekend to a cabin he was planning to rent. My mother thought it was a great idea for our family to bond, so we all set off for a few days away from school, starting on a Friday to get a head start. Upon arriving, the cold hit us hard. We got settled, figured out our sleeping arrangements, had dinner, and started planning our activities for the next day. It was a bit late when we got there, so the first day was pretty uneventful. However, that night, I heard strange noises outside that resembled footsteps. I peered out the window but saw nothing, chalking it up to possibly being an animal. Trying to shake off the unease, I went back to sleep. About 15 minutes later, the mysterious footsteps returned. I woke up my 11-year-old sister, and we both went to investigate. Looking out the window, we saw something, but we couldn't quite figure out what it was. Wanting to avoid whatever it was, we headed back to bed. Despite my attempts to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The next morning, my mother was busy making breakfast inside, and my father was outside. Eager to join him, I asked if I could go out, and she agreed. My sister stayed inside with our mother, who was still preparing breakfast. As I stepped outside, I found my father talking to a short, chubby man with a shaved head wearing a veteran cap. The man seemed nervous, sweating despite the freezing temperature. My father introduced me, and the man, Patrick, seemed relatively normal. Patrick mentioned that his family had also rented a cabin nearby, so my father invited him in for breakfast. Everything seemed fine at first. Later, while playing outside, I fell and scraped my knee, prompting my father to rush inside when my mother called. Left alone with Patrick, he offered to take me to his cabin for a band-aid. Naive and trusting, I agreed. As we walked, we chatted about video games, but things took a strange turn when he asked about my shoe size and age. We reached a cabin that was far from ours, and I began feeling uneasy. Once inside, I noticed there was no family around. The situation escalated when he asked about my weight and mentioned trying on kids' clothes. Alarmed, I wanted to leave, but the door was locked. I finally broke down in tears, and Patrick hugged me, assuring me that everything would be okay. Terrified, I agreed to stay for a quick meal. It was during this time that I overheard a commotion from the bedroom, where Patrick yelled at someone to stay put. It became evident that something was seriously wrong. When Patrick went into the room, I seized the opportunity to escape. I quietly unlocked the door, slipped out, and ran as fast as I could. After what felt like an hour, I stumbled upon our cabin. My father, who had been searching for me, comforted me as I tearfully recounted the ordeal. Concerned, he contacted the cabin owner, and the police were notified. To our surprise, the cabin Patrick claimed to have rented turned out to be unrented, and there was no trace of him or his supposed wife when the police investigated. The unsettling questions about his true identity, motives, and the reality of his claimed family remained unanswered. I'm just grateful that the nightmare ended, and I never had to encounter that cabin man again. A couple of Christmases ago, I spent the holidays with my family in a suburb in Ontario. It was a special Christmas because my parents had this idea of celebrating it in a hunting cabin deep in the woods. They always fancied the thought of being surrounded by family in a cozy cabin during the festive season. I was 18 at the time, and my little brother Tom, who's 11, and I were eagerly looking forward to it. Our dog, Trigger, a German Shepherd, also joined the adventure, a big, friendly companion who can get pretty overprotective, especially when it comes to Tom. We left our house on Christmas Eve at around 2 p.m., packing our dad's truck with presents and all the essentials for a cabin Christmas. The journey was filled with excitement as Tom and I bantered, and our parents engaged in friendly conversation. We met up with some extended family in a village near the cabins, where my dad helped my sister Billy with directions. After that, we continued our journey and reached the cabins around 4 p.m. The cabins were scattered around the woods, each family having their own, with a central one for everyone to gather. It had a pool table and a swimming pool, a perfect place for everyone to chill together. As we unpacked and settled into our cabin, the Christmas spirit was already in the air. We played board games, enjoyed a warm fire my dad started, and relished in the holiday decorations. It was shaping up to be a great Christmas. As the night deepened, my dad, Tom, and I decided to go hunting the next day. I had some experience, but it was Tom's first time. He was too young to shoot, but he was excited to join us. Around 10 p.m., Tom and I called it a night, and my dad, being a responsible gun owner, left his rifles in a bag under the bed. He usually kept them in a locked box, but he figured there was no need since we were going hunting the next morning. Tom and I shared a room with a beautiful view of a flowing river. Trigger settled at the bottom of Tom's bed as we drifted off to sleep. However, the night took a chilling turn around 3 a.m. Trigger, our usually gentle dog, began growling. I dismissed it initially, attributing it to my dad's occasional insomnia. But when I noticed there was no light under my door, I grew uneasy. Whispering to Trigger to be quiet, I tried to reassure Tom that it was probably just a deer outside. Our bedroom door suddenly swung open, and my dad, with a concerned look, asked if we were laughing. Confused, I denied it, and my dad went to check outside. He pulled back the curtain, looked into the darkness, and said nothing. It was strange, but he turned off the light and told us to go back to sleep. Unable to shake off the unease, I remained wide awake, flinching at every noise. Around 4:30 a.m., just as I started to drift off, a strange crunching noise outside our window jolted me awake. It didn't sound like an animal, it sounded like footsteps. A faint tapping followed, lasting for what felt like an eternity. Trigger, now fully alert, was barking furiously. A deep, husky voice sent shivers down my spine as it whispered, "I know you're in there, little guy. Why don't you come out and play with me?" Filled with rage, I grabbed my dad's hunting rifle and pulled back the curtain, ready to confront whoever was playing a prank. To my horror, it wasn't a cousin but a creepy old man, around 60, dirty and disheveled, stroking the window. In protective mode, I threatened to shoot, and the man's terrifying smile vanished as he disappeared into the woods. My parents, alerted by the commotion, arrived in our room. The police caught the man minutes later. He was homeless and suffering from mental issues. It's a chilling memory, and my dad later revealed that he knew someone was lurking around, intentionally leaving the rifle under my bed in case of self-defense. The incident cast a shadow over the rest of our Christmas, and we spent the night in my aunt's cabin, too scared to stay in our own. We left for home on Boxing Day, the eerie encounter etched in our memories. It was undoubtedly the scariest experience of my life, encountering a strange, creepy man in the middle of the woods during Christmas.